Hello people, adults, children, friends, frenemies. Hope you're all well. I am good. Trucking along, working away, doing stuff, writing stuff, reading stuff. Yeah. I want to talk about something that I'm so excited. I've been so on edge to make this video because it is a subject and a world that I absolutely love. And when I was thinking about doing this video and doing a little bit of research, I just got overwhelmed by how much I love it. Crazy, crazy. When I was a kid, I wanted to be one of three things: an archaeologist. What was the other thing? I can't remember now. And an animator. I really wanted to be somebody who drew cartoons or animated films, and I never did that obviously, but I've always had a strong, all-consuming passion for hand-drawn animations, from anime, that I used to watch when I was a kid, to all the Disney films and Japanese films, and anything animated I would just consume like there's no tomorrow. I've maintained this obsession and love for animation, particularly hand-drawn animation. I remember when the shift was happening towards more, the 3D digital animated stuff, I just was a bit, I found it to be a little bit sad. Still to this day, no matter how great the story is and no matter how impressive the digital animation is, it doesn't feel. I don't know how to explain it. There's an element that's missing, that human touch, the human scratch of the pencil on the paper. I know that a lot of hand-drawn animation today just looks hand-drawn. It's probably done on the computer and stuff, but it just looks different. It's a different voice that's speaking to you and saying this story. So I've always preferred, and not to take away from what's great about 3D animation, but I've always preferred that hand-drawn voice that's telling you a story. And one of the greatest directors, writers, storytellers, animators, filmmakers, artists, all-round genius, and I don't use that word lightly ever. I actually loathe that word, genius. It's such a loaded, annoying, overused word, but I think it's very apt right now to use when I'm speaking about Hayao Miyazaki, who is iconic in every way imaginable. I know I'm just another guy on YouTube talking about his love for Japanese animated films and Hayao Miyazaki, but whatever. I'm wearing a tie today, okay? So I can talk about whatever the hell I want. I had an important meeting today, which is why I wore the tie, and I just came back and I thought I would just do this video. Anyway, I digress. Back to the amazingness that is Mr. Hayao. So for those of you who don't know who Hayao Miyazaki is, I shall enlighten you. He is a Japanese mastermind artist animator who co-founded the iconic Studio Ghibli, which has created lots of timeless animated films that you probably may have heard of or seen one or two, like Spirited Away, which was a major Universal hit, and it won an Academy Award, Howl's Moving Castle, My Neighbor Totoro, and so many more. Princess Mononoke, just brilliant. I'm going to do a series of videos talking about each of the films from Studio Ghibli that Hayao Miyazaki directed that I loved. And the first one I want to start with is the one that is, I think, the most important to me, the most precious to me, the one that I have seen over and over again, and the one I just can't get over, which is Castle in the Sky, or also known as Laputa Castle in the Sky. Not only is it my favorite animated film of all time, it's probably one of my favorite films of all time. I've written a couple of articles about it. It's one of those animated films that does so much, so simply and so beautifully through the power of story and animation. What's crazy is that it is the first animated film by Studio Ghibli, and it's the first film that Hayao Miyazaki did for Studio Ghibli in 1986. I'm so bad at math. How many years is that? 86, 96. 33 years later, that film looks amazing. It hasn't aged in aesthetically and how it was drawn, and the story and the themes are so relevant today. Laputa Castle in the Sky is a steampunk fantasy story that Hayao Miyazaki wrote and directed himself. The story follows these two protagonists, our two heroes, two children, Patsu and Shita. Patsu's from this small village. He's really hardworking. He's very mechanical minded. He's like a little engineer, and he lives in this like coal mining town. And one day this girl sort of floats down from the sky with a glowing crystal, and that's Shita. And she's on the run from these military men who are led by the villain of the movie called Muska, who are after her and after this crystal because it has these magical properties. And Patsu helps Shita to escape from them, and they're on this adventure to find out where this crystal is from and to find this floating island in the sky, which was a part of this legendary world, these legendary ancient advanced people from the land of Laputa. So while they're trying to escape these military men and these secret agents that are led by Muska, who by the way has his own very sinister agenda as to why he wants the crystal, they are also trying to run away from these air pirates who are so great, and they inject this humor into the film, and they're led by one of my favorite characters, which is Captain Dola. She's this really strong, cool, funny, materialistic character that I love. So the film wasn't only a major hit in Japan, it grossed millions of dollars, but it was also a really influential and iconic piece of work that influenced how contemporary steampunk in lots of different genres, in films, in animated films, in video games, I would even say in fashion and other streams of pop culture. So Hayao Miyazaki is interesting because all of his films have these inspirations that are so humble and so relatable. So for Laputa Castle in the Sky, he was traveling through Wales and he was passing through a mining town, a Welsh mining town that was kind of, the mining industry was dying, and he sort of saw the effects of how the industry was changing and how it affected the people who lived there and the workers. And he took the inspiration and sort of put it into the movie, especially Patsu's town is sort of this town that is not doing well because the mining industry is dying. So this world that the story takes place is very much like Earth, but it looks like it, but it's not actually Earth because the names of the cities and the towns are all different, and obviously the technological history and the industrial age of the world is very different to our history. But from what I understand, the story is set somewhere between 1868 and 1900, so sometime around there. So Laputa, which is this floating island they're trying to get to, was a dominant world power 700 years before the events of the film. And they kind of flew around the world, bestowing enlightenment, but also, I guess, taking things away. And the people of Laputa became very arrogant and very disconnected from the earth and from nature. And we see this in the beginning sequence of the film in a beautiful animated story with wonderful music, where you see sort of the history of what happens to the Laputians or the people of Laputa, and then the story unfolds 700 years after of Patsu and Shita trying to find out what happened to Laputa and the mystery behind it and why it fell. What's really interesting about Hayao Miyazaki as well is that he draws a lot of inspiration from literature and the written word. One of the main sources of inspiration for Laputa Castle in the Sky is actually Jonathan Swift's Gulliver Travels, the novel, which I have, and I've read bits of it, but I've never really read it fully. And one of the stories is about when Gulliver goes and visits this city that floats in the sky and meets the people there who are very arrogant and kind of dismissive of the world below, and they have these really interesting machines, and their architecture is very different, and they're obsessed with the cosmos and with music. And I found the story in the book and I read it, and it was really interesting for me to draw comparisons between that very short chapter that Hayao Miyazaki read and that really influenced how the people of Laputa, he envisioned how they dressed and how they looked and what their belief system was. In fact, the name Laputa from the film is taken straight from the Gulliver's Travels story, where the floating island is also called Laputa, I believe. Miyazaki took the inspiration from Gulliver's Travels of Laputa, this world within this ancient world within the world of the film that at its height of its power was this dominating force, this center of intellectual advancement, technological advancement, and made it look like this beautiful Eden-like world where technology and nature mix, where humanity and nature work together in this setting of this sort of paradise, Eden-like city. But at the same time, there is a great hunger for world domination and power, and they have these war machines, weapons that are destructive and can, destroy like half the world. And he references a lot of really interesting things like the Old Testament and that Hindu epic Ramayana, I think that's how you say it. And he references them in the story in a way that gives Laputa this depth and this history that exists beyond the history of the world that the characters live in. The film is an epic adventure. It has wonderful moments of comedy, but it also has moments of reflection and quiet, and it has this sadness, this melancholiness to it, and wistfulness to it. And I think it kind of hits a nerve or strikes a chord with a lot of people. A lot of us, for some reason, have this weird fascination or interest towards ancient people and ancient cities that have come and gone, that were at one point, one of the greatest nations that have ever lived, and they were so technologically advanced. And even in contemporary history, always reading about, especially being Arab, I always read about what the Middle East used to be, or what Iraq used to be, or what Lebanon used to be, or this and that. And this story in, Laputa Castle in the Sky really takes those narratives that we've often heard of great nations rise and fall, and adds this sort of nostalgic twist to it that makes you sad. I don't know why, especially through the perspective of the children who are trying to rediscover Laputa. I think what also really makes the film a little bit sad in a beautiful way is that we see that 700 years previously, that this great nation of Laputa disappeared, and it was a dying world. But at the same time, we see Patsu's village that's suffering because of the industrial age and the fact that they can't find coal in the mines anymore. And that's also, that village is also kind of disappearing, and that this narrative of nations and countries and villages and towns that keep disappearing because of technological advancements, or because people just move on, or because of wars, is something that exists in the background of the story, but it very much informs what's happening in the present time in the story as well. And what I love about this story and so many other films by Hayao Miyazaki is that his characters, although his heroines or his heroes, even though that they're young, they're optimistic, and they are willing to put their lives on the line, but not through violence. Throughout this book, there isn't this, throughout this book, it reads like a novel, this film, but throughout the story, there isn't a good and evil and they must fight till the death, It isn't like Patsu and Shita must fight this big evil thing. They're in fact fighting ideas and people who are influenced by these ideas. I mean, there is specific people who are evil, but there's nuanced evil and there's nuanced good, and no one is particularly one or the other. Everyone's a little bit of both. And that's something that I love in all of his movies. Hayao Miyazaki really focuses on children because he thinks that not their naivety, but their hopefulness and their view of the world is so important and often neglected by adults. And it's something that reminds me a lot of Roald Dahl and how Roald Dahl sees the world through children and through his stories. And in this film in particular, Shita and Patsu are the only two that could have stopped Muska, because even though the pirates are good in their own way, and even some of the other characters as well, Shita and Patsu are the only ones that could stop him, because they're the only ones who are children and they have a different perspective on the world and what the world needs or doesn't need. And what's particularly ahead of its time in this film is, in all of Hayao Miyazaki's films, is his focus on female characters. They are never a cookie cutter female heroine. They're always strong and opinionated and change throughout the film, and yet they're still girls, or he doesn't feel like he needs to give them masculine traits, which I think Disney is sometimes guilty of doing. And romance isn't what's driving this story in many of his other films. It's something actually bigger than romance. Even though there are hints of romance or hints of kinship and relationship and friendship, it's never in your face in an obvious way. And I think it's a very different way to approach story and relationships in a movie compared to how the West has always done it. Women are never complements to men in his movies. They're their own entity. They are strong, they're powerful, but they're not more powerful than the men, and the men are not more powerful than them, and they're not powerful in particularly feminine ways. Like Sheeta is not powerful because she's a girl. She's simply a strong character that happens to be a girl. You never see these kind of female characters in children's films or children's animation. The fact that Hayao Miyazaki was doing this in 1986, and he's continuously done it with all of his female heroines, is something amazing, and really says something about his character and his perspective on how the world should be, or his perspective generally on the world. I think the problem with a lot of Western films and Western animated films, maybe not so much today, is that there has to be this, perfect little ending, happily ever after, or this open ending where it makes you think, oh, there's going to be a sequel and then we'll get the happy ending. But no, Miyazaki ends his films openly, but also gives you closure at the same time. That's so satisfying. So that is it. That is me talking about one of my favorite movies of all time and one of my favorite Hayao Miyazaki films. And if you haven't watched it, you must. And if you have watched it, comment below. Tell me what you think, discuss with me, let me know if you agree or disagree. I am so obsessed with this film. I collect memorabilia for it. I collect books about it. I'll show you some. I have this amazing picture book and this other, The Art of Laputa Castle in the Sky, which is just so beautiful. You get to see the drawings and the sequence of animation, and it's just gorgeous. Smaller books, which is kind of like the film split up into like little comics. Like the film is split up into like a graphic novel, basically. I am going to do more videos on different Hayao Miyazaki films from Studio Ghibli, and why I'm obsessed with them, and why I think they're brilliant and great, and how they've influenced me either in my writing or my reading or my worldview. Hope you enjoyed. Do watch it. Let me know what you think. And that is it from me, people. Toodle-oo.